This week, another edition of Tim Catches Up with the MCU, in which Mulele and I discuss Spider-Man Homecoming. This show was originally published on Patreon on November 9th, 2019. To hear more movie reviews and discussions of 1960s Spider-Man comics, join us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics for $4 a month. This is Tim, and here's another episode of Tim Catches Up with the MCU. Welcome to Tim Catches Up with the MCU. This is Tim in Tokyo with Mulele also in Tokyo. How are you doing?
I'm good. And you?
I'm good. And so we have watched Spider-Man Homecoming, which came out July 7th, 2017 in the U.S. And let's start with the things that I liked about it.
Okay.
So, yeah, I appreciated how they snuck in the 60s cartoon Spider-Man theme. During the Marvel Studios sequence at the beginning.
Yeah.
Or almost at the beginning. I was like, I've heard that tune somewhere. Oh, that's what it is.
Well, it kind of beats a cameo of an old lady playing it on her violin in the street, though. So, or you haven't seen that film, have you?
No.
Okay. Sorry, that's the old Spider-Man, the Sam Raimi one.
Okay.
I think Spider-Man 2.
Okay. Yeah, we will get to that sooner or later.
All right. Sorry.
And I enjoyed the bit early on where showing Pete's own iPhone videos of his mission in Captain America: Civil War.
Yeah.
That was fun. Later on, when he goes up against the Vulture and Vulture knocks all that rubble down on him, and as you know, other people have already pointed out 2 years ago when this came out, that evokes Amazing Spider-Man 33 by Lee and Ditko, where a similar thing happened, and it's like one of the most famous issues of Spider-Man because of how Ditko, the job Ditko did on it. And so it was nice to see kind of an homage to that. I mean, nobody does it like Ditko. It wasn't quite as good as that, but I could tell what it was referencing, and I kind of appreciated it just from a historical point of view.
So I'm not really familiar with Ditko's work, other than a couple of screenshots and people like kind of praising him. What is he famous for exactly? Other than, the creation of Spider-Man with the assistance of Stan Lee.
Well, so in that particular issue, it was, how most of that issue was Spider-Man kind of being buried under all this stuff and kind of, going through a crisis of confidence and thinking that he might just have to give up, and then kind of gathering himself up and lifting up the rubble. It just was done in a powerful way in the comic. So it's a lot of people regard it as really compelling, and so it's remained one of the most famous Ditko issues.
So, was that scene created by Ditko himself, or was that a Stan Lee idea?
I think by that point, that's pretty late in the Lee Ditko run, issue 33. By that time, Ditko was basically writing the story, and Stan was just filling in actual dialogue.
Right.
But the story ideas were pretty much all Ditko at that point.
Okay. Because one of the things I've often heard is that Stan Lee was more of a fill in the dialogue guy rather than an actual story crafter. He left that up to the comic artist.
Yeah, well, I think early on Stan was writing stories, but he gradually sort of let Ditko take that over, and their relationship sort of fell apart, and they were barely even talking to each other. Or I think they were not talking to each other for the last 10 or 20 issues of the run. And so, Ditko was just coming up with a story, drawing it, and then kind of sending it into the Marvel office, and Stan would put some dialogue in.
So, were there any artists that Stan Lee actually started with and then continued to get along with throughout the run of whatever project they were working on?
Well, I haven't heard any stories like that about him with Jack Kirby. I think that they did continue talking and maybe kind of getting along, although I think, by the time Kirby left, I don't know if he was upset with Stan necessarily, but he sort of had it with Marvel, because of, I think, creator rights issues and stuff like that.
Okay.
But yeah, I'd have to go back and read Sean Howe's book again about that to see what he said, because it's been a few years since I read it.
I see. Okay, sorry, it's a bit of a segue, but yes, back to the movie.
Yeah. So I really liked Keaton in this.
Oh.
Particularly, the scene driving to Homecoming. It's to see him kind of figuring out that Pete is Spider-Man, and the way that he kind of goes from avuncular to threatening was really well done, I thought. I mean, I have not seen, I'm not much of a movie guy.
Yeah.
I think I've seen, this is probably the fourth movie that I've seen him in, the others being the two Batman films and Dumbo.
You didn't see Beetlejuice?
I've seen bits and pieces of it. I never watched the whole thing.
Well, he's only in bits and pieces anyway. You probably saw all the scenes that he was in. He's got like 15 minutes of movie time in that. But,
oh, wow.
Yeah. Okay. One thing, just on the point of Michael Keaton, I thought that the dialogue was written for a different actor, but his delivery really it set a tone that was much sharper than what the writer was going for, because there was kind of like a look into the camera and make an evil laugh and say your line kind of moment, and Michael Keaton could kind of acknowledge that, but at the same time put so much more into that scene. I kind of felt that he was more I don't know if wild is the correct word here, but there was a lot more to him than just evil guy, or I mean, he was clearly a man who loved his family, and he was clearly willing to do anything for them, or just to kind of continue to get what he needed to get. But none of it seemed over the top. I should rephrase that, because it's all over the top. But none of his. I mean, yeah, he does start much more mildly with just a touch of anger issues, and then he goes to this extreme, violent, kill anybody who gets in my way, opposite end. But none of it seemed out of character from start to finish. I felt that that was him
Hmm.
completely, and you could see from moment to moment, um, he was the same guy making the same decisions, and I was impressed by that. I thought that was more of a Michael Keaton thing than a script thing.
Hmm.
I think with another actor, the script might have been much more ham-fisted.
Hmm. Yeah, maybe. And again, it might be credit to Keaton as well as the script, or some combination. But I think this was the the villain with the most depth of any of the MCU movies up to this point. We've
Mm,
seen some really one-dimensional takes on villains like Malekith in the Dark World, where it just kind of, this is the bad guy. And he
mm,
just sort of acts like a bad guy, and then he gets killed.
mm.
And yeah, here, this villain is, much more three-dimensional, or at least two-dimensional. I mean, yeah, the whole family thing, he just acting like a normal dad, until
Yeah.
he figures out that Pete is Spider-Man.
Yeah, yeah,
And we never have seen, most of the villains we have never seen in that kind of situation where they don't even seem evil. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah.
When Malekith showed up, it was obvious that he was the bad guy.
Well, I would comment, and sorry if this is spoiling a little bit for future movies, but the old archetype of the bad guy is the bad guy, and that's why he is the bad guy. That kind of ends
Hmm.
around this phase,
Hmm.
and they start to really develop more interesting uh, reasons for these people to do what they do, and not all of them can be considered bad guys.
Hmm.
Some of them are actually quite reasonable, even though their methods seem a little bit extreme.
Hmm.
And well, case in point, this guy. Sorry, I forget the name of the character, Michael Keaton's character.
Oh, the Vulture, Adrian Toomes.
Adrian. He doesn't look like an Adrian Toomes. Sorry, Adrian Toomes looks like a skinny bald man in a green suit. But anyway, yeah, he seems to be, in his mind, the good guy,
Yeah.
and that's very much clear. Although he also seems a little bit desperate, and I just like that much more than I want power, more power.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And he does kind of look like the Vulture in the comics a bit. And, they did that thing where they put in like just sort of a hint of the comics costume,
yeah,
where, he's got that, maybe he's wearing like a bomber jacket.
hmm,
And so it creates that has the fuzz around his neck so that it looks
yeah,
kind of like the sort of tufts of white feather stuff, whatever it is in the comics Vulture costume.
yeah, yeah. Although I felt that the material that the wings are made of look really really heavy, like he's wearing a car on his back. And I, some of the things that he does with that suit, those wings, just seem physically impossible to me. But yeah,
Yeah, well, yeah, and it bothered me maybe a little that they had to turn it into his costume into a machine.
mm,
And I know, I haven't actually seen it yet, but I've seen stills. I know they did that with the Rhino in one of the Sony films. And I guess they feel like they have to do that to have it make sense to the non-comics people in the audience. I don't know. It seems like it's one of those adjustments they feel like they have to make somehow.
well, look, when these characters were made, they were made during the nuclear age, and so everybody's irradiated or
Hmm.
gamma radiation or whatever radiation, and it's all nuclear stuff. That was the buzzword, and that's how everybody got their powers. Now we're in the electronics or technology age, um, and so we can do this.
Yeah, although the comics Vulture, I believe I mean, he has no radiation. I think he had some kind of tech that allowed him to fly, something with magnets or something. I can't remember what the explanation was.
Mm.
It wasn't this kind of, I don't know, gasoline powered engine or something.
Well, yeah. It does seem a little bit. It's based on the alien tech that dropped out of the sky
Yeah.
over New York.
Hmm.
But yeah, I can see it. 8 years later, they're developing their own tech, and they reverse engineered a lot of shit. But
Hmm.
um,
And by the way, that was kind of
yeah,
strange that they said it was 8 years ago when, in terms of when the movies came out, it was only 5 years. But I'm not sure what kind of timeline they're putting these movies on.
is it really?
Well, because the first Avengers came out in 2012 and this came out in 2017, but they say it was 8 years ago in the movie.
Huh? I didn't notice that.
Yeah.
Um, that could be a mistake because, as far as I know, they were supposed to be keeping the same pace with real time, more or less.
More or
Um,
less, yeah. Although, Guardians 2 happened not very long after Guardians 1, in spite of what came in between.
well, once they
So,
start kind of retreading and overlapping some of these films, they have to stagger for the release schedule. So I understand that bit, but just as far as there's nothing like this is 3 years in the future, which is kind of an unreasonable thing to do. Well, unless you have some reason for it, but there, none being stated here, it seems like a mistake rather than anything else.
I don't know. I don't know why they decided to make it to say that it was 8 years, but
So it means that this movie takes place in 2020.
maybe.
I don't think so. I don't think so. You'll you'll agree with me later, but
Okay.
yeah.
And let's see. I liked those sort of Captain America films that they kept showing in the school.
Mm.
And then especially the trolling the audience at the end,
Yeah.
which is, I found it to be sort of a self-contradictory joke because he talks about how you waited for so long for something so disappointing, and yet that joke was worth the wait.
Yeah. It was pretty good. But watching that troll bit, I kind of felt like I was reading a Marvel comic,
Hmm.
like when I was in junior high school.
Mm-hmm.
There's Captain America,
Yeah.
and there's Spider-Man, and they are correct in what they should look like.
Mm-hmm.
There was no issue like, yeah, well, Captain America's helmet, it's actually a motorcycle helmet that we painted blue. Uh, there's none of that shit. It was character accurate, and I don't know. It just kind of clicked for me today
Mm-hmm.
watching the film. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
man, this is exactly it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Anyway,
So I enjoyed the movie in places, but some parts of it I found kind of frustrating in various ways. Well, first of all, as you might recall from when we went to see the first J.J. Abrams Star Trek together,
mm,
I'm really uncomfortable watching people being in danger of falling from a great height.
hmm
So the Washington Monument scene, I could barely even look at it.
sorry, you're acrophobic.
I guess, yeah.
Hmm.
It's something that sort of I kind of developed like 8 or 10 years ago, maybe. I didn't
Okay.
used to be that way, but somehow as I've gotten older, I've gotten just terrified of heights, even if I'm not actually at that height myself. I'm just watching a movie about it.
Huh.
Particularly if I'm seeing someone in the movie who's actually in danger of falling.
Interesting.
So I could barely watch that scene. I mean, it was well done, but yeah, it was uncomfortable. And also the bit with the plane at the end, although of course, even without falling, Pete totally should have died. But Iron Man 3 showed us that in the MCU, when you're sucked out of a jet at cruising altitude, the only danger you face is the fall. There's no worry about, no oxygen or freezing temperatures. So yeah, apparently, the upper atmosphere of Marvel Cinematic Universe Earth has plenty of oxygen.
Apparently. I don't know about this film exactly and how tough Spider-Man actually is, because in my mind, he could take it. He could take the punishment.
Mm-hmm.
If he can be punched through the front of a bus, I think he could survive a plane crash. But that stuff in Iron Man 3, I would say that was a bit of a mistake. There were a lot of things I disagreed with in that film, but
yeah. Also, I get frustrated with stories where a lot of problems could have been avoided if someone could have just gotten the message through. And, Happy keeps kind of unreasonably refusing to listen to Pete. And, I mean, it's true Pete had been pestering him a lot about getting a new mission. And so I can see how Happy would be a little frustrated with him. But it just didn't quite seem real to me, the extent to which Happy wouldn't pay attention to him when he was trying to tell him about this threat.
It also seemed a little strange to me that Happy's got job security issues. I thought he and Tony were like tight. And there was no way that Happy was going to be tossed to the side for whatever reason, or had to kind of work his way up the chain. Anyway, it just seemed kind of weird to me.
So I found that frustrating to watch, and it felt a little lazy in terms of the writing on that point. I did buy that Tony would take the suit away from him for hacking it. That seemed reasonable. As I've talked about before, I think it was when we talked about Civil War, that I have no problem with Tony being kind of a mentor to Pete, since that has some basis in the comics of about 10 years ago. And this Pete is much less experienced than the comics one was at that point. So, he needs some kind of mentor.
So how did you feel about their choice for Peter Parker? I don't know how familiar you are with previous iterations, but
I'm not. I'm comparing him with Lee Ditko Peter Parker, and to me he seems quite different temperamentally than the 60s Peter Parker. I mean, this Pete is more kind of impatient and kind of impetuous than the comics one of the 60s, who was more kind of, well, even though the other kids in his high school in the comics didn't seem to realize it, that Pete really kind of had a chip on his shoulder and got angry kind of easily, which is not something that we saw in this movie at all. So yeah, I don't really think in the comics, I don't think I've ever seen Pete portrayed quite this way in terms of the temperament.
Hmm.
I mean, it was okay. It was kind of a version. Of course, from listening to the iFanboy review,
Hmm.
I found, we've talked in some of the other reviews about how some of the things that they put into the movies are from like the ultimate universe of Marvel, which doesn't exist anymore. But it
Right.
was like, different versions of the characters. And there were some aspects of that in this movie, which I had no idea about until I
Hmm.
listened to them talk about it.
Okay.
So, I mean, I don't know how Ultimate Peter Parker was different from the normal Marvel Universe Peter Parker. It might have had some basis in that.
Hmm. Well, I would contend with a lot of these characters, they're not dealing with the source material
Hmm.
um, in a one-to-one relationship.
No, definitely not. I mean, the other characters in the movie, it's well, I've talked in some of the other reviews about how they will take a character name from the comics and apply it to someone who is not all that similar to the character in the comics. And, this movie has that in overdrive.
Yeah.
That the high school friends have at least first names that match with the comics characters, but for one thing, of course, they're much more racially diverse in the movie. But also, I mean, kind of their relationship to Pete is not the same as in the comics, and just their characterization is not the same at all. So yeah, it really felt like a completely different Spider-Man universe. And I
Hmm.
know that has something to do with the Marvel Sony deal,
Yeah.
where you've talked before about how it has to be a certain degree different from the comics. So yeah, I mean, I just yeah, whatever, I guess. One sort of problem that created, I thought, was that you've got these names, Betty, Liz, Ned, Flash,
Yeah.
that are these kind of, waspy 1963 names
Hmm.
applied to these racially diverse characters in
Hmm.
2017, and it just feels like kind of a mismatch.
Well, I I don't know what to say. Um,
I mean, I don't
I
know. I
didn't.
don't know what I mean, you expect there to be characters with those names in the story, so I don't know what if there's any way around it. But
Well, I was going to say before to the point of the Marvel comics not being the exact thing that they are chasing after. I would say they're chasing after the legend of these characters, what people know in general about them.
mm-hmm.
Um, not
Not the specific characters.
yeah, yeah, because I mean the specific stuff. I mean, people know the general stuff, and so they start with that. The specific stuff would be plot details and maybe some underlying connections and whatnot. Um, the Tony Stark thing is not a thing that's in popular legend of Spider-Man,
Hmm.
but they bring it up here and they add it to the legend. But the legend itself is here's the kid with the suit. Um, the characters themselves having to be a little bit different than the characters um, in the Sony version. Like there's no Gwen Stacy, there's no MJ, or at least MJ's not white and her name isn't Mary. But I think one of the things that Kevin Feige's been looking at is to diversify a lot of this stuff because if everybody's white in New York, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sorry, that's unrealistic.
Right.
Um,
Well, and it always was, but in the 60s or 70s,
White was right.
the creators just didn't think about it. I
Yeah.
mean, I've been watching Dallas, which
Mm.
was a show that back then I started watching with like season 4, and I never watched the early seasons.
Uh,
And I'm watching them now. But I was thinking, I mean, I know now that Dallas has a lot of African Americans, the city, but Dallas in the TV show is like 100% white.
Yeah. Yeah.
Certainly, the main characters, there's not a non-Caucasian in the bunch. And it's just like this other, alternate universe city of Dallas.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think a lot of people, a lot of producers are beginning to realize, or have had the opinion and now have the power to change it, that we live in a diverse country, definitely live in a diverse world, and playing only to this one specific demographic is kind of leaving a lot of cash on the table. So why not parse up these characters and diversify them? Apparently in the next Batman film, Commissioner Gordon is going to be black, which means Batgirl is going to be black.
Ooh.
So, Catwoman is going to be black. Well, Catwoman for me has always been black because of Eartha Kitt.
Yeah, Eartha Kitt.
And she is black. I'm sorry, Julie Newmar, she's fine and everything, but Eartha Kitt, she was cool. And, not to throw shade on anybody, but Eartha Kitt is is Catwoman for me. But diverse roles, or diversifying these roles is, I think, a good thing, whether it's gender switching, or sexual orientation switching, any of this stuff, because having the everyman being only one kind of one race, or having the everyman being the only sympathetic character in a movie it's just kind of missing the mark these days. You need to have more.
Sure.
And there's nothing to say that a man can't identify with a woman as a protagonist, or a white person cannot identify with a person of color. There may be differences in what it means to them, but in a general sense, I don't see a problem with it. So yeah, switch up some of the shit that's been made in the 60s or the 50s or in the 40s, and present it in a new way. I don't mind that Thor is a woman. All I want is a good story. Because Thor as a man is, in my mind, 1 for 3.
1 for 3.
Yeah, there are 3 Thor movies, and I only liked one of them.
Oh. Okay.
And that's not a very good record. So the fact that it's a man doesn't really mean much. Yeah.
Old comics can be pretty amusing. Don't you love it? The $sign on the bag.
Yeah.
That means it has money in it. And the early issues of Amazing Spider-Man are no exception.
And there's this line about Mark Twain in here, which has to be the funniest thing Stan Lee ever wrote.
Join me, Tim, along with a rotating cast of Emmett.
Yes, let's Snopes.com this issue of Spider-Man.
Patrick.
Haha, I'm here. Now you must feel my wrath.
And Kumar.
To say you just hit the jackpot about herself is so great.
As we make our way through the transition from Ditko to Ramita, and Peter Parker's transition from being a high school student with a doting aunt,
Aunt May's wearing a Peter, Peter's wearing a Aunt May,
to a college student with his own pad, facing the big questions in life.
Why is Gwen having a party on a Sunday?
It's Spider-Man transitions, along with Spidey's early years discussed in Spider-Man 1963, when Pete's romantic life was nothing but stress.
Oh, he hates me because he looked at my coffee cup.
We raise all the big questions. Why do you put these 2 wimpy guys in suits and ties to guard a super strong man? Our patrons are enjoying Spider-Man transitions. Paul Spence wrote, "Gentlemen, you provided some very funny commentary on this issue. This was a great episode and it was very funny. Keep up the great work."
it just seemed unlikely that, he would go into melee with the Rhino and not get his arm snapped.
Support us at patreon.com/deconcomics for at least $4 a month to hear our monthly podcast as we move toward issue 50.
This is the last face you'll see. And then he puts on the Green Goblin mask. He's like, no, this is the last face you'll see.
Support us at patreon.com/deconcomics.
Sawate. My name is Stella, and I am the host of Batgirl to Oracle, the Barbara Gordon podcast. Batgirl to Oracle is a podcast dedicated to Barbara Gordon, the first woman to hold the mantle of Batgirl for an extended period of time, roughly 1967 to 1988. The goal of Batgirl to Oracle is to examine the character's history from her first appearance as Batgirl and continuing through her tenure as Oracle. Each episode looks at a vintage issue of Detective Comics or Batman, as well as other books like Justice League and Freedom Fighters, and modern issues of Batgirl and Birds of Prey. I also keep track of news involving Batgirl and other members of the Bat family, and I have a revolving series of segments like Babs in the Tube, which highlights appearances of Babs in TV and film, Shipper Spotlight, which looks at a variety of comic and pop culture couples, gives their history, and determines whether they are hot or not, Reading with Stella, which could be described as an audio drama, or just me reading a book that relates to Babs or doesn't, and of course, the mainstay literature recommendation. I have been blessed to interview writers Scott Beatty and Chuck Dixon on their Batgirl Year 1 work, Brian Q. Miller on his Batgirl run, Dwayne Swarzynski and Christy Marks on their separate Birds of Prey work, and the creators and actors of the Batgirl Spoiled, the web series. I hope to interview more creators and actors in the future. My goal, most importantly, is to make a fun, entertaining, and thoughtful show that people enjoy and from which they learn. Find the show online at thebatmanuniverse.net and iTunes, and follow the show on Facebook and Twitter at Batgirl to Oracle. Thank you, and fly on, Babs lovers.
But yeah, I mean, a couple of other things that iFanboy mentioned were from the Ultimate Spider-Man. The character of Ned, Pete's friend, I guess was based on a character in Ultimate Spider-Man named Genki. I know nothing about him.
Genki.
Yeah.
What, he's Japanese?
I don't know anything about it. I'd have to do some research.
All right.
Also, Donald Glover's character.
Yeah. I
was puzzled about who he was supposed to be.
Yeah.
I thought that he was one of Vulture's gang. But who was he? Why was he there? Why was Peter webbing his hand to the car?
He was a buyer at when they were out.
Oh, that's right. He was buying the stuff. Yeah.
And he decided not to buy. Or he was maybe going to walk away, and the shit went really weird when Spider-Man showed up. But he's also the uncle of Miles Morales.
Right, yeah. So iFanboy mentioned that the character's name is Aaron Davis, and in the Ultimate Universe, he was the Prowler. Yeah. And Miles's uncle. Yeah. But I don't know that name at all, Aaron Davis. In the regular Spider-Man, Hobie Brown was the Prowler. Okay. And he was also African American, but it's a different name in the Ultimate Universe.
Okay, I had heard about the connection, and that's the only reason why I know. But the character comes up again in the Spider-Verse, Into the Spider-Verse film, and does actually appear as the Prowler.
Okay.
So. You have that to look forward to anyway, even though it's played by a different actor.
Okay.
Yeah.
iFanboy was pointing out, it hadn't occurred to me, I guess maybe because I haven't seen the other movies, but they, skip the phrase, with great power comes great responsibility, but the movie still has that kind of message to it anyway, even though there's no kind of phrase that sums it up that neatly.
Yeah.
But it's still there, interestingly. And of course, Uncle Ben is not mentioned, and there's no origin, but...
Well, so this how do you feel about that? I mean, do you need that in every Spider-Man movie that's out?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, because they've done the Uncle Ben story now
twice, right?
Yeah, and I think people were getting kind of sick of it, and so when they skipped it, people were like, "Oh, refreshing." But in number two, and sorry, this is skipping ahead a little bit. Number two, people were beginning to complain that there was no mention of Uncle Ben in that one either, and that um, perhaps some of the lessons that Uncle Ben had tried to teach him, or the lesson, was being repeated in some of these films without Uncle Ben, or Peter Parker was having to relearn some of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There was no mantra that he could go back to and just say, "This is fucked," and find his way. When people pointed it out with the second movie, I kind of agreed. Yeah, it is kind of not present in this iteration of it. But if you know enough to complain about it, then you don't need it. And if you don't, if you don't know about it, you're not really going to miss it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. I think people want an acknowledgement of it.
Yeah.
I thought they had like a very mild acknowledgement of it, but without actually naming Uncle Ben or any of that whole thing.
Right. Well, in this movie, Pete made a vague mention of like everything May's been through recently, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he didn't want to cause any other problems because of what she'd already been through, but that what that wasn't stated.
Yeah, yeah. They played it pretty smart. They kind of introduced Spider-Man in the middle of his arc in Civil War, and they give him his first solo adventure, which in general I thought was very entertaining. I liked all of the characters. I liked the way it was. I liked Tom Holland as Peter Parker. Quite a bit actually, much more than the last two. And apparently he is quite the gymnast. So a lot of that Spider-Man stuff is him.
Wow.
No, not all of it. There's a lot of CG in this, right? But yeah, but yeah, he is that physical. So he's in the costume a lot of the time.
Okay. After I watched the movie and I was sort of investigating a little bit, I realized that like practically every character in the movie is played by someone kind of famous. But a lot of them are like they became famous too recently for me to recognize them because I don't pay attention. Although also like Tyne Daly, I didn't quite recognize her because she's so much older than when she played Lacey on a show that I only ever watched the promos for. But like Tyne Daly, who is that? Oh, okay. She was in Cagney and Lacey. Okay.
Yeah. No, I recognized her right off the bat. She's been around, and I'll never forget that face. She's got quite a thick character. Yeah, there were a couple of bit players I noticed as well. The gym teacher was Hannibal Buress, who's a famous comedian.
Yeah, I know the name, but the face I don't know.
Yeah, well, now you know the face, and he always looks like his eyes are closed. But yeah, there were a lot of characters that I recognized from other projects. The guy who had the black guy with the mechanical fist.
Oh, right. Who they called the Shocker. He wasn't wearing a Shocker uniform like in the comics, but
well, it's now I got this gadget. Let me go get some spandex. Doesn't quite work.
Well, yeah, it's comic book logic, and they tend to kind of avoid that in the movies.
Yeah. But he was in Fargo season 2.
Okay.
And I loved his character in Fargo. I loved his portrayal. The man was cold in that one. He's kind of cold here too, but I I just like the way he kind of looks at everything. It's like, well, very dry sense about him. Maybe that's just the way he is as an actor, but I just always kind of liked his bits.
Now, was he the same guy? I didn't recognize him. The guy that Keaton runs into in prison at the end.
No, that was he was knocked off the boat when the feds showed up.
Knocked off the boat. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't remember that detail.
Vulture grabbed a car and yanked it, and Spider-Man got hit by the car.
Okay.
And it was after that guy was already on the edge of the back of the boat. And so when the car came flying, they both went off. But Spider-Man, of course, kind of helped himself up, whereas the other guy kind of fell into the water.
Okay.
Yeah, and so he was picked up and sent to jail immediately, and then they met him in jail.
Okay, yeah, because the name wasn't even said in that scene, but I guess that looking it up, I guess that was Mac Gargan, who in the comics is the Scorpion.
Okay, that's pretty spot on. As far as the look of the Scorpion that I remember in the comics. I think I'm remembering a John Romita Jr. picture, but yeah, I could see him as a Scorpion.
Also, Karen, the AI in the spider suit, the voice is Jennifer Connelly, who I know who that is.
Okay, that's as far as you're going with it. I know who that is.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever seen anything she was in. Yeah, let's see. I was surprised to see Gwyneth Paltrow.
Yeah. I thought she was I thought she'd quit after Iron Man 3.
Well, yeah, because what was it in Civil War that she was missing, and I looked it up and saw that she wasn't under contract at the time. But apparently she signed another contract. At least for this movie. What was even more surprising was how high up she was in the credits for having one scene.
Probably she said, if you want me back, you got to pay me X and you got to do this. And she got that.
Yeah.
But I mean, at this point, they've got the money if they want to do that. I mean, their biggest expense for this film is Tony Stark. I mean, Robert Downey Jr. At this point, he'll show up on set, take a shit, and get $12 million. So
yeah, but being him is a license to print money.
Yeah, although I hear his next film, Dr. Dolittle, is a hot mess, and apparently they had to fire the director.
One of those stories.
Very quick into production. Yeah. Apparently the director was like, yeah, all these animals, just, make it up as you go along. We'll do it in post. It's like, look, the previous was like, look, you've got to actually kind of figure out where the characters are going to be when you stage this thing. You can't just fire pre-visual and expect it to work. This is a CG nightmare. And apparently the trailer that's dropped, there's some scenes like, okay, Doolittle's walking through a door, but for whatever reason, the door has to be CG. And it's like the worst planning for some of these shots. And so we'll see what happens with it when it opens. But to be honest, I'm really not interested in Dr. Dolittle and another fake British accent from Downey Jr.
I used to read those books when I was a kid. I would be a little bit interested in it if it's a good movie, but it's usually, the words "the director got fired" usually mean that the finished product is not worth watching. But because it's hard to salvage those things. Let's see. Back to Spider-Man. So I noticed them trying to solve the problem of knowing the thoughts of a solo hero. Where in the comics, they would just have Spider-Man swinging around talking to himself. Or in more modern comics, having a lot of narration boxes. But, in movies, they tend to not want to have that much narration. So they keep giving him someone to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
So, they have Ned find out that he's Spider-Man. And I don't know if that Genki character knew that he was Spider-Man or not, because I know nothing about that. But
Okay.
but by having someone know he's Spidey, then he can talk to him about that. And also, Karen, the AI, serves that purpose.
Right.
Because otherwise, it's kind of hard to do that scene where he's, locked in damage control by himself. How are we going to know what he's thinking? That scene would be a lot less interesting if it was just him with nobody to talk to.
Yeah. Trying to think if they did that in the sequel. I don't remember him talking to himself in the sequel so much. And I don't remember if the AI was really that present. I don't think it was.
Okay.
No, actually, no, it was. Sorry, my mistake. I'm forgetting the whole subplot of that film.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I noticed again with the soundtrack, with a lot of like pop and rock songs, although not from any particular era. They kind of skipped around, and it was fine, I guess. But one thing that I was just like, no. What are the odds that a high school dance in 2017 is playing Flock of Seagulls? This is not 1983.
Well,
unless they've got somebody my age as the disc jockey.
Well, it comes up every 20 years in pop culture. I mean, it came up with Pulp Fiction in '94. Now, what, 25 years later, comes up again. I think there's a Flock of Seagulls reference for every generation. This is it.
Okay, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, but I mean, I think they played Ramones in this as well, and everything seemed to be kind of like quirky indie pop punk. And that's fine. It had kind of the right energy for this Spider-Man, I felt. So I didn't really feel that the music was out of sync with the character, but you're right. It is kind of out of time for that dance.
Yeah. That was just like, that's diegetic music. The characters are hearing it, and so it's like, I mean, I like that song, but I don't imagine 2017 teenagers even knowing what that song is.
It can be a hit all over again. Yeah.
Given that the Vulture figured out that Pete was Spider-Man, I was really surprised that he survived to the end of the movie. Because, usually if a villain finds out the superhero secret identity, then, he doesn't survive the end of the movie. But I guess that I'm guessing, and I don't really want you to tell me, but I'm guessing that his knowing that is an important aspect of the next movie.
Would you like me to say yes or no?
You don't need to answer.
Okay.
I'm just putting that out there. And when we get there, which is not all that far off, we can talk about it then too, I guess.
Okay. Then I will say nothing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So overall, you liked this film?
I guess so. I was sort of, the points I liked and points that I guess it was sort of, it wasn't in my top 3 MCU movies, but it was fine, I guess. But some things that I might have liked them to do differently, and no danger of falling from heights, please.
It's Spider-Man. What else has he got?
Yeah, I guess, but and yeah, the bit about Happy not listening to Pete still kind of bugs me. I wish that they had a more sort of believable reason that he couldn't let anyone else know, about what he had found out.
Well, I don't know. If he tells Happy, Happy believes him. They investigate and find all the shit going on. In come the Avengers. And it's suddenly an Avengers movie, not a Spider-Man
right.
movie.
Yeah, I realize that, that it blows the movie if other people do know sooner. But I think the reason that nobody else knew, the way that they did it was sort of what bothered me.
I suppose. But you're not a Spider Stan, as they call it.
Stan is in the Eminem song.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've long been a fan of Spider-Man, but yeah, I was a bit lukewarm on this movie. I mean, I guess it was, if I was giving it 1 to 10, I might give it a 7. But
okay, well, the 7 is not bad.
No.
Yeah, so it doesn't crack your top 3, but you're good with it.
Yeah, it was all right.
All right. So it's no Guardians of the Galaxy 2, but it's better than an Iron Man 3.
Well, yeah, definitely better than Iron Man 3. That was one of my least favorites.
Okay.
Do you have anything else that you wanted to say about it?
About the movie, not so much. Just in general, I enjoyed the film. It's a fun, quirky little film, and there were some scenes that I really enjoyed. The Washington Monument one was not so special to me. The boat was a callback to the train. Sorry, it's a spoiler for a future episode. And the boat scene was a callback.
Okay, to one of the Sony movies?
Yeah.
Okay.
There was also a second callback to Spider-Man 1 where he's hanging upside down and the AI's like, here's your chance, Peter, you got to kiss her.
Right, but it was in the elevator that was crumbling in the Washington Monument. Yeah, that was pointed out on iFanboy. Okay.
Yeah. But the film itself is charming. The character has heart. And even though he's kind of nervous and twitchy, I kind of like that. And sorry, I keep wanting to launch into Spider-Man 2, but we'll save it for when you see it. But anyway, yeah, I like the film. It's not perfect, but it's good.
There's one other thing that bothered me, and I mean, it's certainly an aspect of Spider-Man comics, but somehow was a bit more annoying to me in the movie, was how Pete ended up, he kept missing events because he was turning into Spider-Man and running off. And they really kind of glossed over what explanation he might have given for missing that whole competition in DC.
Yeah, it was kind of weak.
Yeah, he goes to DC and then he doesn't show up and they win the competition anyway. And, there are some kind of brief, vague mentions that people are a little annoyed with him for missing it, but, not anything more concrete. But also it just always makes me kind of annoyed that he keeps missing everything. Let him have somewhat of a normal life.
Well, wasn't that always the choice? You can have a normal life, or you can save all these people.
I guess.
Yeah,
But, hmm, yeah.
yeah. There were two things I wanted to ask you real quick.
All right.
First, Aunt May.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of the casting?
Well, I mean, again, it's definitely not your Lee and Ditko Aunt May.
No, no, it's not. But I mean, the fact that the movies have moved away from that have made her much younger. And we might have talked about it a little bit in the Civil War discussion, but the fact that Tony Stark is like chatting up his aunt.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, if you think about it, it never really made sense in the comics, like how old she was. I mean, she's not his grandmother. You know,
Yeah.
she's his father's brother's wife.
Yeah.
And so it would make sense for her to be more of an age that she could be his mother rather than his grandmother. I don't know why Ditko drew her so old.
Maybe he's got a thing.
But so I mean, in a way, you could look at it as sort of fixing a problem with the original.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay. I mean, I'm not wedded to her being 80 years old.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to ask was there seemed to be no spider sense in this.
I
this
had
film.
not thought about that. That's true.
Yeah.
I wonder why they left that out.
Yeah, it seemed that there were a couple of times where it would have come in to play, but it just wasn't present.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it a little bit weird. And then I heard it mentioned by a few people. And yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, well, I wonder if that's one reason why I had the sort of feeling like Spider-Man felt a little too weak somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's partly just because, in this iteration, he's so young and inexperienced.
Yeah.
And I mean, we did see him lift up all the rubble. So, I mean, he's got strength, at a level that Spider-Man should. I mean, he seems a little smaller than I think of Spider-Man being. But again, he's only a teenager here. I suppose it's basically just because he is a teenager here where, in, the modern comics, he's, I don't know. I mean, they keep it kind of vague, but he's got to be in his 20s somewhere.
Curious.
And of course, much more experienced and more confident. Yeah, that's part of it. In the movie, he has some confidence issues this early on. Especially when the rubble falls on him.
Right. It's actually kind of a hard scene to watch because he's crushed both physically and mentally.
Yeah.
And to see him kind of work his way through that, yeah. But the kid has heart, and I do like that.
Yeah. Okay. So next we've got, I believe, the one Thor movie so far that you enjoyed, Thor Ragnarok.
Oh, wait. No, we wouldn't have Thor Ragnarok next.
Yeah.
Black Panther.
No, Black Panther is after Ragnarok.
How could this be?
Well, that's the order they were released in.
Okay, I guess I'm misremembering it because
yeah, because Thor is November 2017 and Black Panther is February 2018.
Okay. Well, okay then. I guess that's the way it will be.
Yeah.
And then after that, Infinity War.
Yeah. So Thor, Black Panther, Infinity War.
Yeah. All right.
Wow. Yeah, just 7 more.
Yeah, but keep in mind that Infinity War is about 2.5 hours, and Endgame is about 3 hours.
Yeah.
So
it's like double movies.
Yeah, it's like 8.5 more. And you'll be watching some of those. You'll be doubling up on some of those.
Okay. We do 2-parter podcasts.
Well, it depends on how much you want to say at this point. I've analyzed Infinity War to death.
Okay.
And, yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll maybe just do extra long episodes, perhaps. Well, this one has become a kind of an extra long. We've seldom gone over an hour like this.
Oh, it's been over an hour. It didn't feel that long, but okay.
Yeah, my timer says an hour and 2 minutes. So yeah, let's wrap this up.
Okay.
All right. So thanks for listening, and thank you, Mulele.
Thank you.
Okay, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Bye-bye.
If you've enjoyed this week's show or any other Deconstructing Comics episodes, tell your friends. Share your favorite episodes on your social media. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube by clicking our social media buttons at deconstructingcomics.com. You can help the Deconstructing Comics family of podcasts by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. And go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, to shop on Amazon to support the show, and to find links to subscribe to the podcast. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and we'll critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. Next week on Deconstructing Comics, Emmett talks with translator Evan Magore about translating the French graphic novel Call Me Nathan, about a French teenager's trans experience, originally written in French by Catherine Castro with art by Quentin Zouton. That's next week. See you then.